Is the United States abandoning Europe? Is it even turning against Europe? Is it relying with Russia and China, abandoning the world stage and moving backwards to become isolated and selfish empire somewhere in Western Hemisphere? Such and many similar questions arise with the publication of the new US National Security Strategy just a few days ago. I believe we need to have a look on this and try to calm down and rationally analyze what the US National Security Strategy says and what it means for us in Europe, what it means for all others around the globe. Hi, I'm Pavel Macko. I'm a retired 3-star general, former Deputy Chief of Defense in Slovakia. I spent also 8 years as a flag officer in different NATO headquarters, be it in Land Command Heidelberg, where I served as a Deputy Chief of Staff Support, as well as the commander of first ever NATO Joint Logistics Support Group, or I have directed operations in ISAF headquarters, and also I served as a commander of NATO headquarters, NATO Joint Force Training Center in Poland. I studied National Security Strategy and National Resource Strategy at the National Defense University in Fort McNair, Washington, D.C., and I'm proud holder of the Master of Science degree from that university in the subject. So let me, in following minutes, to comprehensively assess what the US National Security Strategy says, what it means, what is the major change as opposed to the previous strategies, and what it means for all of us around the globe. National Security Strategy is not just some document. Normally it's a broad, however, policy-oriented document which should inform the nation, state institutions, what is the major objective of the National Security Strategy, what are the ways and means how to deliver on them. I admit this is not full-fledged academical assessment of the National Security Strategy 2025. However, I will try to bring you to more details of the strategy. I will try to compare it with the previous Biden strategy, but also with the established pattern of US national security strategies. And then I will try to compare this strategy with strategies of some advanced nations, closest allies of the United States, and draw some conclusion. So here is the title page of the National Security Strategy of the United States of America, released in November 2025. And here you can see the table of content. So it contains introductory part, remarks from the Mr. President, and then it's more about what it's meant as a document, this strategy. The substantial portion of the strategy itself is in the following chapters, when the strategy talks about what should the United States want, what they want in overall, what they want to be in the world and what they want from the world, what are the America's available means to get what they want, and then the strategy itself, which states its principles, priorities, and it's followed by the regional strategies for specific regions around the globe. I will maintain this strategy paper in my hands, and I will occasionally read from my notes also for this from this document. If I look at the generic structure or common structure of US national security strategy as it has been established in the period after the end of Cold War, so it regularly has introductory part where president sends clear message. He is the one who is endorsing the national security strategy, and he is also sending the clear message where the focus of his strategy is. It describes normally the security environment, global context, so it assesses the global trends, threats, opportunities, and so on. And Next part is normally the statement of the national interests, which is absolutely important for such a strategy. So it's about the critical survival national interests, vital national interests, as well as important national interests, which could be stated and should be stated in such a document, and then the core objectives, what should be achieved in delivering on those national interests, or protecting those interests and further enhancing those interests. Normally then the strategic document like this contains the major pillars and strategic priorities. So those are thematic chapters outlining key goals of the strategy and the ways how to achieve those goals and means to be used in achieving those goals. And then it's followed by regional strategies, and last not least, normally it contains a description of institutional reforms. That means how the agencies and departments of the United States government should work together in order to achieve these strategic objectives and strategic goals. And last not least is the call for action, where normally there is a clear statement of the not only of the vision but also a clear statement of the effort, and that's depicting the main line of effort and line of activities to fulfill such a national security strategy. So national security strategy is not purely ideological paper, just opposite. It is to be the comprehensive document which states the national interest, which defines national objectives and describes the strategic principles and policies and key regional strategies to achieve those objectives. And it's a material or document which then allows further development of policies in specific departments, sectors and agencies in order to fulfill such a strategy. So it must be very informative. It should be free of any ballast or unnecessary wording, unnecessary declaration of ideological visions, but rather very practical document which could be further translated to practical policies and action plans. If I look at this current national security strategy and its content, I will continue with description of individual chapters of the strategy. So in the introductory part, first there is a message from the Mr. President. I wouldn't comment that much about the personal message of the Mr. President. It didn't deviate from his regular way of expression. So you could find there also the statement self-prizing about the 8 different peace deals which were achieved within few months of the current administration. Well, that's the personal view and personal expression. Many can see it different. First, all of those deals may not be sustainable in the long run, as we could see, including the one in Gaza. Some of them were with very little or non-involvement of the United States, like the one between Pakistan and India, where the United States and Mr. President states that he was the mastermind behind that peace deal. Well, Pakistan to some extent praises the US government. India completely denies any US involvement in it. So this is something which is very temporary, but okay, that's the style it could be in such a document. What is real message in the introduction is the critique against the previous, not just Biden's administration, but all the administrations, at least since the end of Cold War, and the strategy stating that the previous strategies were vague, idealistic, and disconnected from the US core interests. Well, you may have critical view on that, because all the other nations were watching, following United States in delivery of their previous national security strategies, and now many are shocked that it is declared by the United States government, led by the President of the United States, that all of it was wrong and completely wrong. In wording about the correction, NSS 2025 is defined as a necessary correction rooted in realism, sovereignty, and national interest. Per se, it's perfect. There is no critique to it. Obviously, you need to see the context and the wording, and then it is less clear and less comfortable statement from the beginning of this strategy. The tone of the strategy is critical of globalist approaches. However, this is not about globalist approaches. This is a statement about the global involvement of the United States, and it emphasizes more cultural and civilization survival of the United States in that fear, like United States was threatened for its survival, and its culture was threatened for its survival because of many other external players. The truth is that within 2.5 centuries of the US history, the United States was promoting democracy and was the beacon of the democracy in the world. Actually, the latest 80 years, when the United States went out of isolationism and became the world stage player after World War II, United States has reached the biggest world influence as well as the biggest growth of its economy and stability in its own history. So let's have a look on the United States national interests. So what the United States want? First, they want to protect their country, its people, its territory, its economy, and the way of life. Absolutely perfect statement. I wouldn't expect anything else. Second is they want to have full control over the borders and over immigration system and over all transportation networks. Again, it's about sovereignty, but it's absolutely legitimate interest and objective. Third, they want resilient national infrastructure that can withstand natural disasters, resist and thwart foreign threats, and so on. Absolutely perfect. It is about a robust infrastructure which definitely supports national security. Fourth, they want to recruit, train, and equip the strongest conventional military force on the globe. Absolutely perfect. The United States is still the global player, although the ambition is significantly lower in this national security strategy, but the goal itself is quite fine. If I look further, fifth is that they want to be the world's most robust, credible, and modern nuclear deterrent. United States has nuclear deterrent. It is agile in its innovation, and after what we see Russia is doing and China is doing and some other nations and having the ambitions to become nuclear, it's quite clear that the United States needs to modernize its nuclear deterrent. The sixth is United States wants to be the world's strongest, most dynamic, most innovative and advanced economy. That's perfectly fit. The problem is in this strategy that they want to achieve it being selfish, unfair against the external players, and basically denying the fair competition and just empowering its own economy. But it works for the national security interests. If I look further, it's about the United States want to have more robust industrial base. Absolutely perfect. The only question is whether United States in seeking more robust footing for its national strategy really needs to produce everything in the United States, regardless the cost and regardless the efficiency. But it's clear and it's very appropriate that the United States wants to have access to all critical materials, not to be dependent on one nation or just few group of nations and potentially even adversarial nations. If I look further, 8 is that the United States want to have the biggest, most robust world's innovative energy sector to become independent and energy independent, as well as able to trade with energy elsewhere. That's fine. Then Next is that the United States want to be unrivaled soft power. Well, this is important in the era of hybrid activities, hybrid threats, and hybrid wars conducted by our adversaries. The real question is whether this will be used against the US traditional adversaries, or if it will be used also in Western Hemisphere against their partners and even against the allies of the United States. And finally, they want to have restoration and reinvigoration of American spiritual, cultural health and protect American culture. I don't think this is under major threat, and it's quite odd that such a interest is stated in the national security strategy. So if I look at the vital interests, vital national interests as stated by the United States in this strategy, the first one is to dominate Western Hemisphere, to ensure that the Western Hemisphere remains reasonably stable, but exactly under full control of the United States. And the strategy itself here refers to Monroe Doctrine as a Trump's corollary of that doctrine. Second national vital interest is to have strong, independent economy. United States reflects that in Indo-Pacific region there is a half of world economical output. So United States wants to preserve its economy as the strongest one, but the tone is about to have it selfish, US-focused economy. Third one is they want to support allies in preserving the freedom and security of Europe, which is great. However, the second part of the statement of this national interest is while restoring Europe's civilization, self-confidence and Western identity. It might look great, but it might be also very offensive against the Europeans in light of domestic US political issues and the controversies. Fourth, the United States wants to avoid that any adversarial power would dominate the Middle East, but it's basically backing out of the Middle East. However, it wants to assure that there is no adversarial power dominating Middle East in the future. And fifth, the United States wants to ensure that the US technology and US standards, particularly in artificial intelligence, biotech and quantum computing, would drive the world forward. So from this point of view, quite viable and fully respected national interest as stated in the strategy. The controversial part in statement of the US national interests and aims is that cultural and domestic agenda, which normally does not belong to such a document as a national security strategy, particularly when it is partisan, when it is biased, driven by the ideologies like MAGA movement and so on. So there is no national consensus on such domestic agenda, and having it in such a national security strategy is controversial. So if I summarize it, so United States is defining its interest with focus on core interest only, which is security of homeland, prosperity through reindustrialization, sovereignty and cultural cohesion. It rejects nation building, global governments, involvement of United States in global affairs, and it is against forever wars. To some extent this is justifiable, to some extent it means the United States is backing off from the world stage, it's leaving that space for other players like Russia, China and other non-democratic, autocratic powers of growing, rising powers like Iran, North Korea, and it's self-focusing on a nation of the United States and on America and Western Hemisphere. The goal, according to this national security strategy, is a strong, independent America that resists external and internal subversion. So it's a rather isolationist and a little bit paranoid statement of the national interests. So let me now turn to the means of power as defined in the US strategy. As the core for the delivery on this US national security strategy is military. Already now United States is spending $1 trillion for its military. That budget is covering also modernization of nuclear and conventional forces. The focus is on asymmetric deterrence, including drones, missiles, and United States will invest heavily in undersea capabilities as well as in space capabilities. The next is industrial power, industrial base. So it calls for large-scale reindustrialization, reshoring of supply chains, tariff protection. Here it is some portions of that it's acceptable and it's promotable. Some are rather controversial, like tariff protection, because it will not necessarily eventually protect the competitive edge of the United States economy. Second is that the United States may lose its trust and economical growth when focusing on ineffective production on its own continent, because some of the things are to be outsourced, and outsourcing is a reasonable economical tool. However, it's quite appropriate to have assurance of stability of supply chains as well as access to the critical materials. In energy area, United States states its expansion on oil, gas, nuclear power, and gaining energy independence as a security pillar. Border security becomes very dominant in this security strategy. It's elevated to national security priority, and it leads to militarization of the southern border with Mexico. And cartels have been designated as foreign terrorist organizations, allowing military operations against them, which is, by the way, controversial both from the US law point of view as well as from international law of armed conflict point of view, and current controversies over assumed guidance from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, for killing people on the boats is just the beginning of the story. What are the strategic principles? In this strategy, United States stated 6 major pillars of its national security strategy, and those are: first, national interest focus. So they are rejecting vague global missions that would be appropriate. However, it also leads more towards the withdrawal of the United States from the world stage and losing what it has gained after World War II. That means major influence. United States served as a beacon of the democracy, as the brakes against the expansion of the communist totalitarian rule around the globe. But multilateralism gave United States much more power. It gave United States the room for significant growth. United States assistance during post-World War II reconstruction in Europe, like Marshall Plan, has not only helped to recover for Europe, but also it helped significant growth of the United States. Second is peace through strength. This is already publicly advocated by the US government, and it is focused on deterrence via military and economical power. However, it is deterrence based on the US interests, not the deterrence within the alliances. However, deterrence of the United States against the outer world. Third is limited intervention. So United States wants to avoid nation building, its focus is rather on punishing decisive strikes, like we have seen one against Iran, or we are seeing now the attempts to crash down the drug trafficking from Venezuela, and so on. Fourth is flexible realism, pragmatic case-by-case engagement in the world. This is possibly the most controversial part of the newest US national security strategy, because it could be also understood that the United States, in face of other global competitors, is basically leaving Europe alone, or just limiting its assistance to Europe, or its bonds with Europe, leaving space for Russia, which is dreaming of its Euro-Asia empire, and China, which is expanding in Indo-Pacific region. So it might seem to someone that the United States, in facing of the major adversaries like China and Russia, is backing off and rather focusing on Western Hemisphere, where it can have upper hand over relatively weaker partners in Latin America. The fifth is sovereignty first. United States is strongly against supranational institutions again, but this was something which made United States really great, and now making United States great again, there is in my view, false assumption that if United States abandon all the multilateral platform and alliances and focus only on their sovereignty, they will be stronger. Maybe for a while, in the long run, I would question that. And sixth is regional denial. With focusing on the Western Hemisphere, United States want to prevent adversaries like China, Russia, Iran, and cartels from gaining footholds in the Americas. What are the strategic priorities in this national security strategy? First, homeland security, border, cartels, cyber defense. Those are the key issues which the homeland security will be focusing on. The second significant priority is economical nationalism. So introducing tariffs which may not necessarily serve always to better competitiveness of the United States economy, reshoring of the production, and industrial revival. Many of them justifiable, some of them very controversial, which eventually may lead to weaker United States and to weaker US economy, however protected by tariffs from the outer world. Energy dominance, focus on fossil fuels and nuclear expansion, that's clearly stated. Military readiness, there will be larger budgets, modernization of both conventional and nuclear forces, increasing the US standalone deterrence posture. And cultural defense, which is rather unusual in such a national security strategy, and it treats ideological subversion as a national security threat. Now let's have a look to regional strategies. These are relatively weaker than it used to be in the past and are representing significant deviation from the previous US national strategies. If we talk about Western Hemisphere, this is the focal point of the United States security strategy under Mr. Trump, which is revival of Monroe Doctrine, Trump's corollary. It is denying foreign influence in the Western Hemisphere. If we look at the Indo-Pacific, it's more about realization, that's the practical realism, realization of power of China, so it's decoupling of China. It's still about defense of Taiwan, but it seems like a conditional one. Naval deterrence is South China Sea, but generally speaking, you might have feeling that it's more about that the United States doesn't want to bother China, and if China doesn't bother United States freedom of navigation and trade within in the Pacific region, United States wouldn't care that much about what China does in its surroundings, except maybe Taiwan. Europe, probably the most controversial and annoying portion. First, United States critique European Union weakness, which is actually fair, but the way how United States approach this critique is very uncomfortable and very unusual for the ally, because it is almost in hostile tone, which means that United States is attacking actually the European Union, and in the context of the other parts of the strategy, it seems like the United States would prefer a strong Russia dominating the Euro-Asian continent and quick settlement with Russia. It would prefer very quick negotiated settlement in Ukraine, regardless what the justice and the long-term outcome of it might be, but it's focusing more about quick settlement with Russia, which is appropriate, is burden sharing in NATO, which is absolutely right, but it opens the question with the hostile language which is used in this strategy, whether United States is really promoting the building more balanced NATO with more closer ties and bonds between United States and European partners, and with more opportunities for United States defense industry to participate in rearming Europe, or it is just making noise and actually creates fears among European partners that Europe should rather invest those increased budgets and spendings for the European industry growth. Worth of note is the attempts, although it's not stated directly in this strategy, but attempts of some layers of US government supporters like Steve Bannon, Epstein, who wanted to actually disrupt European Union. Now we see the recent statements from Elon Musk, and all are attacking European Union, which sends a message that United States would prefer split and disorganized European individual nations because it seems more easier for them to deal with. Now, this might be just perception. However, politics, even international politics, is about perception. So I'm afraid that this wording and language will create also in the future a lot of noise within Europe. If we look at the Middle East, it's more or less focused on containment of Iran, no democracy building missions, and rather disengagement from the area. However, promoting, and that I would compliment on that, promoting the continuation of Abraham Accord style of deals and negotiations within the region. And in Africa is shift from aid to trade investment. So it's more on business, trades and deals oriented policy and focus on critical minerals. So if I look again back to the critical resources and strategies and strategic priorities and means of the US strategy, what you could see is a significant shift towards the deal making and case-by-case arrangements, and it is significantly decreasing the role of the diplomacy. So this is probably very strong deviation from the traditional US DIME methodology. That means diplomatic, information, military, economical pillars of national power to be equally applied in national security strategy as it has been in the past. If we look at the institutional reform, there was no specific mentioning of this institutional reform. However, you can read it between the lines or in the lines within different chapters. So the strategy sees as a major problem that the federal agencies are seen, independent federal agencies are seen as compromised by the ideological capture. However, it's ideological trust from the MAGA movement, which is represented by the President of the United States. So it's actually something which we have seen in Central and Eastern Europe during the Cold War era, when dominated by the communist rulers. That ideology was penetrating to all spheres of life, and now we see that actually with the statement of or accusation of ideological capture of the federal agencies, there is a quite clear approach to actually ideologize the US federal agencies. So solution of this problem should be the bureaucratic restructuring and loyalty to sovereignty first principles, which sounds bipartisan. However, the implementation might be basically promoting those officers and clerks who would fully be loyal to the current government, to the current administration, rather to the Constitution of the United States. That's the fear which might appear. The goal is, stated goal is, to align institutions with national interest and no globalist agendas. Again, this is not about the globalist agendas. This is about interconnected global world, which United States was the biggest promoter after World War II in order to avoid the catastrophes like World War I and World War II. So now we are at the crossroads, and United States seems like abandoning these global institutions and multilateralism and focusing on its own interest, regardless the interdependencies with the rest of the world. So in conclusion, call for action could be phrased as a restore sovereignty, cultural identity, and hemispheric dominance, move out of the rest of the world, or leave the space for other players. Although not stated, it seems like China, Russia, Iran, and other ones. The promise is that the NSS 2025 is not about global leadership, so there is a demise of the United States on that ambition, but about survival and strength of the American Republic. Well, that means the American Republic might be strong, but in the long run, if the US abandons the global stage, might be actually relatively weaker and may face harsh realities in situation when Russia, for example, is attempting to turn BRICS formation of BRICS grouping as a strong anti-Western, anti-US alliance. So in such a circumstances, abandoning the global alliances and moving alone, it's a rather risk factor. So, and that's directly leading me to the risk assessment and trade-offs of this strategy. So reduced global engagement may weaken eventually United States influence in Asia and Europe and leave it to players like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Burden shifting in NATO is appropriate. However, if it is done under pressure, it can leave the alliance with fragmentation, with some duplications, and at the same time with the gaps within the capabilities. Energy dominance, focus, sidelines, climate commitments, potentially straining relations with European Union partners, and climate is a general thing. So it will have effect also on United States, regardless whether the United States will go more isolationist, it will come to the United States anyway. And transactional diplomacy, this is also very controversial. So this deal making, short time, short-sighted, quick impact, quick earning and quick gains, focus may be efficient in a short run, but we see it also with those already announced peace deals, that those are very likely not to be stable, but it can undermine the long-term trust towards the United States. So this was the broad overview of the newest US national security strategy, and let's have a look now to comparison of this strategy with the previous strategies. Let me start with the direct comparison of this current newest NSS with the previous administration, NSS, under President Biden. If you should forget everything, you should not forget one thing: the major change, major shift in comparison with the previous NSS by Biden's administration is geographic focus. In this strategy, United States is clearly focusing on Western Hemisphere. So that's a major shift. And then second is obviously directly linked to the first one, and that is decreasing US role in the global stage, on the global stage, and in global multilateral institutions. So what are the major shifts in national resource strategy? As I already said, geographical focus. This is more about reassertment of the Monroe Doctrine, which prioritized US dominance in Western Hemisphere, especially against drug cartels and migration flows. The previous strategy was about global engagement with Indo-Pacific competition and transatlantic unity with NATO and European Union as central pillars. So it's shift from global leadership to hemispheric dominance and very selective engagement elsewhere abroad. If I look at the intervention and military posture, so the previous strategy was advocating for proactive deterrence within the alliance, so not just alone United States, but within the broader alliance, forward presence and coalition-based military action. This new strategy calls for very limited foreign intervention. It puts a very high bar for intervention, rejects forever war. However, which is very big paradox. However, endorsing targeted military operations, strikes on Iran nuclear sites, Caribbean anti-cartel operations, and so on. So that's something which is like basically we don't stick with the allies anymore. We act unilaterally, and it will be driven by our interests. It will not necessarily be based on the rules and the broader interests of our alliances and community. Another shift is in the relation against or towards the allies and partners. The previous strategy was strengthening alliances, NATO cohesion, and multilateral institutions. This one calls for burden sharing, which is appropriate. Europe was, in a long run, underspending on its own defense, and I would compliment on this to US government. However, the political culture interference with European issues and talks about civilization decline are not pro-alliance moves, but rather antagonizing the partners and allies. So it is from alliance solidarity to transactional burden shifting and skepticism of European reliability. So it's like, if not abandoning, but it's decreasing the relevance of the Europe in United States strategic considerations. If we talk about economical and industrial policy, United States in its newest security links security directly to economical sovereignty, and it's focusing on tariffs, reindustrialization, energy deregulation. The previous was more focused on climate change, green energy, and resilient supply chains. So it is shift from climate-centered resilience to industrial revival and energy dominance. If we talk about technology and innovation, United States in its current strategy believes it can on its own alone achieve the dominance in AI, quantum computing, autonomous systems, undersea and space domains as decisive areas for the future military power. The previous doctrine strategy was highlighting emerging technology, but framed it within cooperative innovations and promotion democratic values. So the shift is from cooperative innovation to competitive technological dominance by the United States. Here is the comprehensive comparison table. So comparing the Biden strategy and Trump strategy. Geographical priority for Biden was Indo-Pacific region, Europe. Now it is Western Hemisphere and very limited engagement abroad, very selective limited engagement abroad. Regarding military posture, it was focused on coalition deterrence. Now it's limited unilateral high bar for intervention. Talking about allies, its focus was on strengthening NATO and European Union. Now it's more about burden sharing and skepticism of Europe. That means decreasing the bonds and links with Europe. Regarding economy, focus was on climate and resilience. Now it's on tariffs, reindustrialization and energy dominance by the United States. In area of technology, the focus was on cooperative innovation. That means working together with broader alliances and establishing the rules and standards also for smart and acceptable use of technologies like artificial intelligence. Here is more focus on comprehensive competitive dominance in key technology areas. And the overall narrative of the security strategy of the Biden administration was more on democracy and values, and this is more about America first and pragmatic deal-making style peace claims. Let's now have a deeper look on comparison of the Trump's strategy with the all strategies in the post-Cold War era. As already alluded to, the established structure was more about the presidential message, introduction, strategic environment, description and global context, stating of national interest, core objectives, strategic pillars and priorities, regional strategies, tools of national power, institutional reforms, and conclusions call for action. Normally, this presidential message framed the strategic vision and urgency. Often it included personal message from president, which is appropriate. This one is more just about the personal message from the president and not less about the strategic vision. Strategic environment normally depicted global trends, threats and opportunities, great power competition, terrorism, climate change. In this current strategy, actually, you don't read that much about Russia or China. So this is quite strange. And the rest is obvious. In terms of tools of national power, it was traditionally led by the doctrine of the equal use of all elements of national power as defined in DIME, that means diplomatic, military, economic, intelligence. This was cornerstone of US strategic thinking for decades. And in institutional reform was less ideological. It was more about the effectiveness of interagency coordination, modernization, and whole of the government approaches. So this was the regular pattern. However, each of the administrations in post-Cold War era slightly deviated from that. It was driven by the context, by the development of global affairs as well as technologies in the world. So Clinton administration focused on engagement and enlargement, and notable additions were democracy promotion, economic liberalization. While during the Bush era, that was just after the September 11 attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon, it was more about preemption and unilateralism. It was directly linked to the global war on terror, focusing on homeland security and defining axis of evil. During the Obama administration, we have seen multilateralism and smart power back. It was more about the climate change, global development, cyber threats, which were developing rapidly around the globe. The first Trump administration was focusing already on sovereignty and great power competition, and it was talking more about economic security, border control, transactional alliances. Now it's talking even less about the transactional alliances. And Biden was about the defining fight between the democracy and autocracy. So Biden was trying to develop the global alliance which would not allow the autocrats to grow and rule the world. So it was more about inclusive growth, climate resilience, alliance, revitalization. If I look further, here is the comprehensive comparative table between what used to be the traditional NSS, national security strategies, and how it has changed with the newest Trump's strategy. So if I just go quickly on the right column, you can read it if you want in more details, if you pause the video. So it's now the current strategy is more about harsh critique of the all past strategies. So everybody was just wrong. And now finally, after decades or even centuries, the right and the most smart administration counts. That's what you could read from the strategy. Strategic environment, it's really not described, because if you don't describe the Chinese, Russian efforts, you cannot really talk that you have described the strategic environment. So it's more focused on internal subversion, cultural erosion, and ideological warfare from within. So this is really inward-looking national security strategy, if not disregarding, so basically neglecting the global players and global trends which are around the United States. Talking about national interests is sole focus on core national interests, rejecting all globalist mandates. In strategic pillars, priorities, there are 6 principles as already mentioned. Regional strategies, these are really prioritizing Western Hemisphere, and Europe is portrayed as weak in the Pacific region, is framed through economical nationalism and basically leaving all the space for the security issues, maybe except Taiwan for China. Tools of national power, as opposed to previously applied dime model, now it's more about military dominance and then militarization of borders, energy deregulations, reindustrialization, and role of diplomacy, as opposed to dime model, it's minimized close to zero. Institutional reforms, it's more about the ideologization of the US institutions and bureaucratic restructure in order to make federal agencies fit and loyal to the current government as opposed to loyal to the US citizens and the US Constitution. Because the claim is that the federal agencies are compromised. So this is very one-sided view on institutional reform, which may not necessarily improve the US national security, but actually it can lead to detrimental effects on US national security. And in conclusion, it's call to restore national sovereignty and cultural identity and rejects all abroad engagements except those few limited actions as deemed necessary by the current administration. In this national security strategy, there is a repeated reference to Monroe Doctrine, so allow me to shortly say a few words about it. It is doctrine which goes back to the beginning of 19th century, and actually this doctrine dominated the US foreign policy for a while, and the most of the time actually. It was announced by President James Monroe in his annual message to Congress on December 2nd, 1823, but it was drafted largely by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams. The core principles were no new European colonization in Americas, any European intervention in the Western Hemisphere should be seen as hostile to US interests. The US would not interfere in European wars or internal politics, and US would respect existing European colonies. The context is that United States was just newly born nation. It was just few decades after it gained independence. US was protected by the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, locked between them, and there was a group of newly independent nations in Latin America. So United States wanted, through diplomatic means and other tools, to deny or to discourage the European powers to take control of the Latin American lands, and at the same time United States was basically passive towards the other European colonies. It was actually supporting also the UK or Great Britain Empire, from which it gained in the past independence, in the notion that if it doesn't influence the US trade and national interests, there is no worry about it. This doctrine was later adopted and changed or reinforced by so-called Roosevelt corollary. That means Theodore Roosevelt changed it slightly further and expanded it to justify US interventions in Latin America. The legacy of this doctrine was persistent in the United States foreign policy. It was invoked by presidents from Theodore Roosevelt to John Kennedy, and with few pauses like World War I and Woodrow Wilson statement of the self-determination right for the nations in Europe, and then after another period of isolationism, the US involvement in World War II, and then it has significantly changed after World War II. However, the elements of this policy and doctrine were present even after World War II. So if I look further on this doctrine, how it has evolved during the time, so original doctrine was given by the circumstances that the United States were relatively weak, so they didn't have expansionist ambitions towards the outer world. However, they wanted to be protected on American continents, so it was more inspired by anti-colonial sentiment and protection of its own hemisphere. Theodore Roosevelt have changed it in a sense that it was focusing on classical imperialism within the Western hemisphere dominated by the United States. So there was a clear strive for justification of potential interventions in the Western hemisphere. Now the newest iteration, Trump corollary, is about militarization of the Western hemisphere in order to deny footholds to China, Russia, Iran, and cartels. So United States should be hemispheric hawkish in Western hemisphere, while elsewhere they will focus more on sovereignty first and assertive application of such a approach. So if United States declares that the current national security strategy is derived from Monroe Doctrine, let's compare the both. I mean, the original Monroe Doctrine and US national security strategy as of 2025. So core principle was more focused by then to keep Europe out of Western Hemisphere. So it was more about hemispheric independence from Europe. The current doctrine revives Monroe Doctrine via Trump correlated in order to deny foreign adversaries footholds in America. So it's more aggressive stance. It is continuation of imperial posture towards the other nations in Western Hemisphere and actually pushing away the other players from that hemisphere. The scope of this strategy, by the time it was given by the circumstances and relatively weak United States, it was regional focus on Americas only. Now it's more global, but it prioritizes Western Hemisphere and Indo-Pacific region, and actually decreasing the engagement of United States elsewhere, including Europe. The threats, by the time the threats were perceived European European colonial powers like Spain, France, Russia. Now it's drug cartels designated as terrorist organizations, migration, China in Taiwan, South China Sea, and Europe's decline and Russian-Ukrainian war. If we look at the means of enforcement, initially it was just a diplomatic warning. Later, during the Roosevelt's time, it was military enforcement. Nowadays, it's military buildup in Caribbean area, border militarization, introducing tariffs, reindustrialization, energy dominance. The philosophy of the original Monroe Doctrine was separation of spheres. So we have a old world and new world. New world controlled or dominated by the United States, and old world dominated by European powers. This strategy, the Trump's strategy, calls for flexible realism. It's talking about sovereignty, economic independence, burden sharing, and very limited intervention. But this flexible realism might be also seen as a weakness in face of other major powers, and thus focusing more on Western Hemisphere. In terms of values, it was the pragmatic isolationist as stated by Monroe Doctrine. Now it's more nationalist, sovereignty first, skeptical of multilateral institution. But we need to see the difference between the Monroe's time and nowadays. United States gains its biggest influence due to the multilateralism and its global role which United States played since the end of World War II. So the impact is that United States establishes its primacy in Americas. Now we'll see what the impact would be, because United States reframes US role globally, so it's basically pulling out of the world emphasis on hemispheric dominance and very selective global engagement, which shocks Europe, but Europe is now facing reality. If I have a quick look on the development of US foreign policy, so obviously this is not a comprehensive history of US foreign policy, but there are some major milestones. The first one was Monroe Doctrine, so no new European colonization or interference in Americas. Then it was followed by the Roosevelt corollary, which was US will intervene in Latin America to stabilize the region. After World War II, with the growth of an expansion of the communist rule in Europe and in the world, Truman adopted his doctrine, which was basically the holding the communist back. So it was about US supporting free people against communist threats around the globe. In 1985, there was a famous Reagan doctrine who clearly stated the axis of evil, the Soviet Union and its backed governments, which led to the arms race, which eventually United States and the West won, and the Soviet Union and its empire finally collapsed. And now we have a new iteration, which is Trump's national security strategy, which is a revival of Monroe Doctrine, denying foreign footholds in the Americas as the primary focus of US foreign policy. Let's have a quick look on the other nations and their security strategy. United Kingdom has a new security strategy as of this year, and the strategic context is that the current security situation is an environment is perceived as a radical uncertainty with Russian aggression and technological disruptions. It's based on three pillars: security at home, strengths abroad, and sovereignty and asymmetric capabilities. The tone is United Kingdom is strongly committed towards NATO, but it has its emphasis on sovereign capabilities and national unity. If we look at Germany, it has its national security strategy from 2023, just after the Russian invasion to Ukraine. So the concept is integrated security. Robustness, resilience, sustainability. Germany wants to play an important role in system of collective defense. The domestic focus is about crisis prevention, social resilience, and sustainable resources. International engagements is focused on NATO and European Union. What is unique element is strong emphasis on human security. I mean, poverty reduction, social justice, climate resilience. If I look at France, it has conducted strategic review in 2025. It stated 11 objectives, including nuclear deterrence, resilience, economical mobilization, cyber power, European defense, autonomy. Key themes are preparing for high-intensity conflict, technological sovereignty, and hybrid threat response. France pushes for stronger European defense pillar within NATO and autonomy in strategic decision making. Canada, it's in tricky situation. It has very old policy from 2004, which is still awaiting update, and its framework, it's about securing an open society. Core interests are to protect Canada, prevent threats from Canadian soil, contribute internationally, and the gaps are that this strategy lacks modern, updated national security strategy despite growing hybrid threats, and now even with complicated situation due to the US pressure on Canada in its closest neighborhood. So here is the overall comparison of all the other players. That means United States, UK, Germany, France, Canada, Australia, and as you can see, United States is focusing its core principle on sovereignty deterrence. For UK is resilience and alliances. For Germany is integrated security. For France, strategic autonomy. For Canada, open society. For Australia, strategy of denial. Domestic focus is in the United States on border and energy and industry. For UK, homeland resilience. Germany, human security sustainability. France, economical mobilization resilience. Canada, threat prevention. And Australia, denial posture integrated force. International focus, United States is more about burden sharing and transactional alliances, ad hoc transactional alliances. UK is focusing on NATO and new partnerships. Germany on NATO, European Union. France on EU defense pillar and NATO. Canada on international contribution. Australia clearly Indo-Pacific regional focus and cooperation within AUKUS. Unique for all of this is for United States is retreat from democracy agenda after decades of being the beacon of democracy and and free or liberal world order. United Kingdom, it's about radical uncertainty. Germany, it's developing strong security link. France is focusing on nuclear deterrence, and Canada, as I already mentioned, has outdated framework, and Australia is explicitly focusing on denial. So it's establishing its doctrine on denial. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the deep insight to the newest US national security strategy and its comparison with the very recent national security strategy, as well as with the long-term trends of the United States security strategy, as well as the foreign policy. So you could see what the impact of the new US national security strategy might be. So let me to add few remarks. First, this is very profound change of the course of US foreign policy and US national security strategy approach in three areas: by the language by which is written this national security strategy, by the structure and content which deviates from the previous strategies, and by the substance, with United States basically backing off from the world stage, leaving the space for other global players like China, Russia, focusing on Western Hemisphere. Basically, it seems like United States adopted strategy which is the fear from the stronger partners, so just trying to maintain the trade relations with Russia, with China, leaving them to do what they want in their perceived sphere of influence, and focusing on Western Hemisphere and focusing only on freedom of trade and freedom of navigation in Indo-Pacific region, still maintaining the commitment for defense of Taiwan, however, leaving the rest on the China and its partners, so leaving the space for China to dominate in the Pacific region and Russia to dominate Euro-Asian area, to live the Russian dream to conquer and rule the Euro-Asian empire controlled from Moscow. Second, which is very disturbing, is the language towards Europe, but we have to accept that this is US national security strategy, that actually this isolationism, it's a long-term prevailing trend within the United States foreign policy and security strategies, and Europe has had enough time to adapt, and we didn't do our homework. So instead of antagonizing our relations with the United States, what we should do is to try to maintain as good as possible relationship with the United States, keep them within the alliance, rebalance the burden sharing within the NATO towards Europe, become self-sufficient to possible extent in our own defense and deterrence against particularly Russian threat, but also against other threats, still relying on US strategic deterrent capability. However, we need to clearly invest more in our defense. But in light of this strategy, and particularly its part on ideology and attacking the European values and undermining the European unity, we should be very careful. So even increase the budgets may not necessarily be all dedicated in order to promote the US military industrial base, but also to build European military industrial base complementary to the United States, and basically assert more significant and dominant role in our own defense. And third, it's to be ready for the world where the United States will be less engaged around the globe, will be trying to make short-term ad hoc deals and trade-offs as opposed to long-term strategy. So not only European Union, Europe, but also the rest of the world cannot rely anymore on United States if this strategy will be further adopted and implemented by the United States government and other governments. And last not least, my friendly warning is, first, don't take it offensive, take it as a fact. It's new US security strategy. We have to adapt to it. If we are strong enough, we will be also a good partner for the United States. Live with the changing US profile, adopt our relations with the rest of the world accordingly, and don't expect that with the next US administration it may dramatically change once again 180 degrees. If that happens, lucky we are, but if it doesn't happen, we have to be ready. We should not wait another 2 years until the end of the term of the current US administration and expect that there will be some miraculous change in the course. This is trend which was dominant in US foreign policy for decades, and most of the time in 2.5 century history of existence of the United States. And it's time for us to assert our own role and to be in charge of our own destiny. Thank you.